Welcome, everyone. We are here with our 10-minute tips for comprehensible input philosophy teachers. So if you are into the idea of making your transition to proficiency a lot more practical with quick tips, then you are in the right place. My name is Devin, and I am the teacher, author, and consultant behind La Libre Language Learning. And this particular series, every Wednesday at 4 p.m., is to help you get closer to your goals in your classroom by answering questions that you and part of the community have asked me. So I've got a good one for you today, and that is, in a CI-oriented classroom, rooted in proficiency, one of the hardest things is helping students get invested, get involved, and take risks. So that's what we're talking about today, is how can you help your students to take more risks in class with the language? So let's get started. Let's spill the tea. Here we go. All right. The very first thing that we need to talk about with this question from you, from the audience, is that this is a really good one, because getting students to take risks, I think, is one of the hardest and also most important piece about being a world language teacher. Something that we need to acknowledge and is easy to forget because of all of the other pieces of our profession that we already have to remember, is that when you're a beginner in a language, every word is scary. Then you add on top of that they're in a school environment, which for many students is not their favorite place to be and not a place of comfort. So we have a lot of work to do to get our students from a place of reluctance to speak, to being very comfortable speaking, to then even get to that very, very high expectation of feeling comfortable taking risks. So make sure that you are managing expectations accordingly based on where you are at in the year. So the next question then logically is, how do we build that? The first thing that, and I'm going to tell you about my experience as a world language teacher, the first thing that I liked to do was to build a solid foundation with relationships, not in the target language. This was a way that I used to cheat a little bit, where I would spend a lot of time in the first 2 weeks talking to my students a lot, and not just me talking to them or them talking to me, but I would give students a lot of time, like 5 minutes, while I was going around taking attendance, and of course, managing behavior accordingly, walking around and eavesdropping a little bit. I would give them a lot of time to talk to each other and build that rapport with each other in class, because I taught in a high school environment, and you would be surprised how little high schoolers actually know each other. Just because they're in the same class does not mean that they know anything about each other. So that was one of the ways that I used to build community in class. Was they were working on things while they were talking, but I would give them very structured opportunities to talk to each other and to me and tell me about their lives and what was going on with their lives. Some of those questions were things like, tell me about something funny that happened to you in your last class period, or tell me about the most recent test that you had. Why was it hard? Why was it easy? Who was the teacher? What did you think about the test? Did you think it was fair? Was it not fair? You have to get them to shut up when you ask questions like that. When you ask questions, you have to watch the quality of your questions as well. Because if you ask questions like, buenos días, clase, ¿cómo te fue? Like, how was your weekend? How was your day? You're going to get the same responses over and over again. But if you ask them very specific questions that require them to really think, and that everybody also has in common, you're going to generate just an explosive level of conversation, and it builds community a lot faster. There's also this trend that I saw this summer online that maybe many of you are trying too, that is really exciting. If you haven't heard of it, try this, where people are putting pretty outrageous questions on their warm-ups that are like this or that style to get students to have really fun community building, outrageous and delightful discussions to raise the energy and amp that up, almost like an icebreaker vibe for the beginning of every class. It's things like my favorite one that I saw was choose your battle armor. And it was all of these pictures of really outrageous outfits from various celebrity shindigs, like Cannes Film Festival and galas and things like that. And when you put the word battle armor on it, those outfits become a lot more interesting. And let me tell you, I would love to be a fly on the room in a high school classroom if you put 6 different pictures of celebrities in completely whack outfits and ask them which one they wanted to be their battle armor. That would be so much fun, right? So picture being in that conversation for just 2 or 3 minutes. Like, don't even worry about your goals, target language, any of that. And then you ask them to do something in the target language. Imagine the level of energy and how much it's going to change than if you jump right into the task right away. It's so powerful how much these simple little things make a huge difference in how willing your students are to take a risk. It's the idea that your classroom is a community. It is a social environment. So there is a lot of work that we need to do to loosen everybody up and warm everybody up to each other so that they are ready to take risks in front of each other. One other thing that I want to remind you of is that if you are a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, I cannot speak to elementary, but with middle school and high school, the thing is, middle schoolers and high schoolers derive a lot of their identities from how they act in front of teachers. So you need to circumvent this by changing the way that they interact with you. Many of them are not taking risks when they want to because they don't want to be seen by their peers as the kid who's always asking and answering. Or you might have that other problematic archetype where they don't ever want to be wrong. Maybe, for a bunch of different reasons, we don't even have time to get into it. But you know why? It's hard to be wrong in front of a teacher. So let's make sure that it's as easy as possible for them to use a ton of target language without feeling like quote unquote wrong, which we, if you've seen some of my videos before, or maybe you're new to them, then you know that this is the philosophy. In language, there are no errors, there are only levels. Teaching them to that up front and making sure they are well aware of your philosophy on errors is very important, but rules only matter as much as they're enforced. Community expectations only matter as much as they're enforced. So if you believe that, and if that's part of your philosophy in language teaching, learning, and acquisition, then look at how much you're policing errors in your classroom and in your activities and how much you correct errors, because students pick up on that. So if they notice that there's a lot of error correction going on, however you may feel about it, they're not going to be taking risks in front of you. That's just that's a psychological truth about teaching and learning. So be aware of how much that happens and how publicly it happens. Is it happening in a large group setting where you are talking one-on-one to a student and everybody else is listening? Or is it happening in a small group setting where it might be just you and the student in that conversation and everybody else is working on something else? That would be the time to address a common thing that you're hearing over and over again. That builds a lot of trust. So going back to the point of if we want to preserve this environment of giving them ample opportunities to take risks in class, another thing to think about is how often many teachers are guilty of this. I know I was every day, and I would, in order to counteract it, consciously plan activities around it. It's so much easier to just do teacher asks the entire class questions, right? Like we're just so built for it. We do it all the time, right? We're not, the whole classroom system is naturally equipped for that. But helping students to feel confident taking risks in your classroom, that is the least beneficial setup for them. So I want you to, the next time that you go into your classroom, take stock of how many times you address your students in this format. Teacher, choral responses from the entire classroom. Teacher, one student or maybe two students respond, and you're in the entire classroom format. Because what helps to create an environment that's community oriented and very, very much accepting of risks and and welcoming of that is when you like the smaller the group, the better. So the more that you put people into pairs or small groups and you ask them to answer to each other in tinier groups, or you're dividing half the class and asking one section to do this and one section to do this, or you're walking around and asking students quick little quips, especially if you're doing something like a weekend chat, instead of having everybody's eyes and ears on you and that one student, you're going to get a lot more students taking risks simply from changing up the format of how you ask questions. So this doesn't have that much to do with proficiency and CI, because I think that this is just a general language teacher practice of how do I make my classroom more welcoming to students taking risks? How do I help students take more risks? Really, I would say that the number one answer is the social setup of your classroom. How are you asking for information from students in every single way possible? How are you building relationships with them and asking for social information from them? How are you building their confidence and asking academic information from them? Is it always a 1 to 30 format? Or is it, how many times can you break it down to be a 1 to 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 format? Because, oh my gosh, look at those odds, just how much less risk they have to do by answering your question. The last suggestion that I have for you too is allow students, I'm not sure why teachers are averse to this, but allow students to work with their friends as much as possible, as much as possible. Not only does it eliminate friction, but students are much more willing to take risks in front of people that they already know. And there's this narrative going around in the educational world that it's important that we push students beyond their social boundaries. And that's very true, but high school is a war zone. It is already very difficult. And there are so many instances as a high school teacher that you realize how incredibly socially demanding high school is. Never in my life have I been so challenged by social situations than I was in my high school years, right? 14 through 18. Never. Like college was far, like there was a lot more adult challenges, but college was far less friction. And going into adulthood, far less friction. So respect the fact that your students, just by showing up to school, are demonstrating a lot of bravery, and that they're navigating a very difficult social situation just as it is being in high school. There's so much pressure. There's a lot going on, and they are trying to formulate who they are. Your middle schoolers, twice as much. So respect the fact that they're already in a very socially challenging environment anyways, and they have a lot of pressures on them. And if it works for your academic goals, setting them up for success by letting them work with people that they are comfortable with as much as possible is great. Do not, of course, let the students who are always saying that they want to work by themselves every single day, because we know that that's not great for their social development either. But let students be comfortable as much as possible with the people that they are working with. And if this doesn't resonate with you, I would challenge you to the fact that outside of the scenario of school, you get to pick whoever you want to work with in your work settings almost all of the time. It is a reality of adulthood that we get to choose who we spend time with. So I'm not sure why we're forcing students to do that in school. My 2 cents on that. That will help your students, though, to invest a lot more of their risk taking in your classroom, especially when it's time to, like really buck up and be willing to take risks. One last thing too, like those are the social environment things that you can help with. And one last thing that you can really, really do. I learned this from another teacher. I'm trying to remember who it is so I can give credit where credit is due. Oh, it was La Loca. She does this incredible thing, and I think that we should all be modeling this as well, where every single time that a student even makes the teeniest, tiniest effort to speak in the target language, you go over the top with praise and ridiculous amounts of kindness, gratitude, all of the positive feelings towards the student for trying, regardless of whatever came out of their mouth. If it was any kind of effort, you celebrate the hell out of it so that as the year goes on, students get the message very quickly that you are looking for people to put themselves out there. That is what you value, not whether they are correct or not, because no matter how many times you say it, that's probably their number one fear. So that's my last tip for you. Today, we went over ways that we can help our students feel comfortable taking language risks in our classroom, being more academically challenged in our world language classroom. And here are ways that you can do it. First, make sure that you allow students to get to know each other and that you know them really well. And if you got to do that in English, do it in English or the L1, whatevs, it's fine. You're going to need that 5 minutes. It will pay off tenfold in how you experience your classroom. The other thing that we talked about to summarize is what are the ways that you're interacting with your classroom and asking for information, because the less eyes that are on students at a time, the more willing they're going to be to take risks. So switch up the format as much as possible and put them in just in front of as few people as possible to talk until they start to feel comfortable. And then the last thing is to praise as much as possible when they give you effort. Oh, and the other last thing, bonus last one, is to allow students to work with their friends as long as it's not at all academically impeding their progress or their social development. Most of the times it's not. You know the ones that shouldn't work together, but most of the time students work much better when they know people. So allow that to happen. That's okay. You can switch it up every now and then, but 85% of the time, let students work with people they're comfortable with. All right. That is our tiny class for today. I hope that you learned something that will be really helpful to you and that you can take into your classroom to help your students feel more comfortable taking risks. I will see you on the next one next Wednesday. Bye for now, y'all.